There we go. So now we are live. Great. Well, hey, nice to see you, Ben. Everybody that doesn't know, this is Ben. Ben and I are old friends. We've been working together for almost 9 or 10 years, which is
10, yeah.
Astonishing. I think we met on the steps of a log cabin in the middle of a downtown metropolitan area like 10 years ago and ended up winning a reality show. And now we're here.
That's true. All those things did happen.
That is an accurate depiction of our history. So anyway, I'm glad we get to chat. We did one before and the audio wasn't that great. So I'm glad we really get to touch on this again. And what I would love to chat about today is sort of multi-touch attribution. You know, we both have a history of doing 10 figures plus with clients over the years and really scaling brands and stuff. And what I'd love to get into is a little bit first off of just multi-touch attribution and all of the tools that are starting to solve for incremental lift and attribution and decision making and all of that stuff today. But first, there's a lot of people tuning in. We're already getting them popping in from YouTube and from Facebook, but they don't know who you are. So maybe we can do a slight little intro of who you are and then dive into, well, what is multi-touch attribution and all of that fun stuff. So, hey, Ben, who are you?
Hey, Charlie. Yeah, so to do it kind of quickly, I'm basically an agency media guy who mostly in the digital space, heavily in the performance space, but I worked with kind of, large integrated accounts for most of my career in agencies. Turned digital agency founder, player in ad tech, again, performance buying, ran a performance agency kind of when it was called a trade desk for a while. And now I'm consulting and I'm also principal at an investment bank. So both working still heavily in the world of performance media, really working with a lot of e-commerce companies, a lot of media companies, helping them drive growth, using some of the background that I have, and then also advising on transactions in the areas where I have some kind of expertise.
I love it. So longtime player in growth and acquisition, performance media, got into a little bit of mergers and acquisitions, and now just kind of using this life experience to figure some stuff out. And it's funny how we all get to where we are. Yeah, I love it. So a lot of what I'm really hoping to talk with you about today is somebody that's been in the game a long time, something that is, in my opinion, been a impossible measurement of a mildly fictitious thing for a couple of decades that everybody's trying to solve for, and I haven't seen anybody do it well, which is multi-touch attribution. And some of the folks that we use, and we can get into some of the examples, they're really familiar with tools like Hyros, which does improved attribution in Facebook ads in some spots. There's Wicked Reports, which is kind of a couple, maybe more of a legacy player. There's Northbeam, which really pitches itself as a high-end MTA solution. And then also I've shown you some triple wheel dashboards and some stuff. So there's a lot of these tools that are now really working for brands that are in the startup to potentially scale up space. But I think for a lot of people, they're looking for MTA to solve questions that they might not need it for. And I think there's a lot of confusion around what multi-touch attribution is and how to use it and who it's built for. And so as somebody that is with a lot of experience in this space, I'm curious, with your experience, what is multi-touch attribution? Who is it built for? And how are people using it?
Sure. So I'm going to come at it through kind of my experience, and I'll kind of frame up the industry as I think I understand it. So MTAs, in my experience, have been large enterprise installations done typically in coordination between a large brand advertiser and an agency, with again with kind of consulting from the MTA seller. They tend to be, heavy tagging, in which case where they're trying to align every single creative, every single platform, every single campaign, set up the nomenclature, set up the tagging, get everything kind of tagged correctly, so that the MTA system itself can count every impression, every click, etc. that happens, and then look at the journeys. And they fire tags, and then look at the journeys of individual buyers or converters, and kind of see, all right, so in sequence, what were people doing, and and then they can kind of count that up and kind of stack it up and see, all right, well, a lot of people touched this platform or touched this campaign or touched this ad, and a lot of people did this, and then they kind of assign back a value to each of those touches according to how many people that did those touches converted. This is not as clear as I want it to be, but it's a counting up of sequential impressions and sequential engagements with advertising, as well as owned media, and then looking at the final transaction and assigning proportional value of that transaction to all of the elements and all of the touches that led to that transaction.
Yeah, like it kind of sounds like.
Hopefully, a lot of your people know what MTA is enough, but it tries to answer the question: hey, what's actually contributing to my conversions? Right? Hey, what as I'm allocating my budget, tries to solve against last touch. Right? So okay, so it's not all search, right? If it's not all search, and I know if I turn on some upper funnel activity, and my search improves, how do I assign a value correctly to what's actually driving the conversion?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would say, based on what you're saying, and I agree with it, the way that I look at it is, we know that the marketing funnel is more complex than a Facebook ad or an email or a search. And every platform kind of takes credit with an attribution of what they did. And when you add up all the reports of every platform, you get sometimes 20%, sometimes 300% more transaction volume and revenue than you actually did. So you have to understand who gets credit for what.
Right.
And I think MTA is built on the idea of, or what I have seen is it's built on the idea of, how do we find an average value of the average customer journey across all of our things, so we can understand what a weighted acceptable CPA or ROAS or volume or value or cost is per platform.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also seen some
more creative, etc. I mean, one of the great things about an MTA is you can usually segment, at least within your display or kind of your programmatic activity. But you can get segmented pretty well. You can see which creatives are contributing, that sort of thing. There's walled gardens. Usually, like, it's harder to get visibility into kind of which campaigns or ad groups within search are contributing. It's harder within kind of the Facebook ecosystem to figure out what's contributing at deeper levels than just, hey, Facebook's working. But I think that segmentation is important. Also, you mentioned that if you're looking at the conversion by platform, if you're looking at Facebook and saying it's driving 20 conversions, and you look at search and it says it's driving 20 conversions, and it looks at whatever and it says it's driving 20 conversions, you add those up, you're gonna see 60 conversions, and in reality you got 45. So trying to kind of demystify what you're getting in terms of who's trying to own those conversions within their conversion window.
Yeah. And I think that that's really the idea, because there's sort of this thing of like, well, you can't trust the platform's attribution. And be fair, I don't think the platforms are lying. I think there's software that more or less behaves the same every single time. But the idea is, can we use this to weight that average depending on our media mix, et cetera? And I'm curious, in your experience, who is this designed for? Because I think it's specifically to solve questions or bring value to very specific people in a business or in an agency or in a relationship.
Well, I mean, it's designed for a whole suite of people who are making media investment decisions. I think I think how it's used is more a function of how the data that gets presented and how people kind of process the data.
Yeah.
So I mean, so what are you doing with it? You're looking at you're looking at the suggested value that each of the platforms is, or campaigns or whatever is delivering, and then you're trying to make a budget adjustment, right? So that's, ultimately it's someone's hands on keys, kind of making a kind of proportional budget adjustment, moving money out of one platform, moving money into another platform, etc. So that's who it's made for. And I don't know. And it's also, the managers, and the CMOs and the kind of the executives who have to make kind of larger quarterly kind of decisions. So I mean, I think the question is it brands? I mean, is it brands or performance groups? I think it's actually a nice service for brands, and brands have been adopting MTAs more regularly because they're looking for more measurement on kind of what's contributing in the end to brand development, and how does our brand work ultimately convert into sales. And MTA is proposed to answer that, at least in the digital ecosystem. And so I think that's what I'm going to kind of pause there, and I'm going to say I think that's what's driving a lot of the main adoption, which is trying to answer the question for brand advertisers: how does our upper funnel, mid funnel end up translating into some sort of online conversion? And I think it's most helpful there, and then secondarily, performance buyers who are trying to optimize in the mid lower funnel are clearly going to use it.
I agree with that. And what I've found a lot of when the brands have done, because I've been in spots where it was like a 5-6 figure, like full on integration and stuff. And often I found we're going to find a weighted average that makes sense. I was in a spot where it took us 9 months to install something, and the end result was what made the manager of each platform look good. It was like the balanced weighting of everybody keeps their job.
Right.
And I've also seen ad agencies do it where the balanced weighting is basically they put a thumb on the scale to make sure that they can take as much credit for something that happens. And I see it for executors, the button pushers, to do, well, this ad set or this ad or this creative or this campaign is what's working. But it's like, yeah, but that's only in the media mix that you have retroactively when looking at that customer base. And as soon as you change the offer, as soon as you change the media mix, as soon as you make a move, well, the water finds a different level, right? And so using retroactive data to then make future decisions based on, well, this one creative made the difference, or this one ad set, or this one audience, or this one campaign, etc. I think is how a lot of people are using it.
Okay, so if we're gonna jump into the criticism of MTAs, spoiler alert, we have an alternative solution that we use. But So we're going to talk about the kind of the problems with MTAs. Look, I think they're a pretty good solution using the available technology, especially given the last decade of ad tech and development, right? Using tagging and kind of tracking. It's a big data solution, and you kind of bring everything in and you add it up and you give a valuation. The issue for me, is that essentially counting, right, stacking data, like a lot. So this, YouTube campaign generated a lot of impressions or a lot of views, right? Or this social campaign generated a lot of engagement or whatever. This seems positive. And you can, and then especially if there's a lot of it, then assigned to kind of a conversion down the road, or any elements within kind of someone's path, right? The issue is that you don't actually see causation, right? You don't actually see a correlation between that activity and the thing. You assume a correlation, you assume causation when you see a lot and then a conversion, but you don't actually have mathematical correlations kind of that are defined. You can just kind of you see it and you make assumptions and there it is. But what you're doing is you're just counting, and then you're saying, okay, well, 85% of the people saw this and then moved down the path and then it ultimately made a conversion, or 45% of the people went to the website before deciding, and you tell yourself a story and the story makes sense and you've brought meaning to the data. But the meaning is storytelling, which makes sense and may or may not be true. But I think what we're doing, what the MTA does is it gives you a clearer vision of what's happening, but it doesn't actually tell you why. And then we don't realize that we're bringing the why to it and then making investment decisions accordingly. So that would be my criticism of it. But it's still a big data solution that's better than last touch, because you're looking at more. And then kind of the ultimate problem with MTA is just that it relies on tagging and cookies, and it's like it's in trouble.
Yeah, I love that, because you're coming at it from a very different perspective, which I think is really smart. Like, my issue with MTA is that, and especially in the lower end of businesses that are in the $1 million to $5 million range, where they're adopting the startups that are trying to maybe move to scale up and potentially even exit phase, they're looking at it to see, well, what gets credit so I can spend more there? And that's kind of the thought process. And that makes sense. Mm-hmm. The problem is, as soon as you throw everything at what's working, the balance shifts, so something else looks better. And then and you end up chasing stuff.
Yeah.
And I think what I've noticed over the last 4 or 5 years, honestly, is that a lot of digital marketers and brands have come up in a spot where Facebook was an unfair advantage, right? Like the attention was underpriced and the technology was just good enough at a low enough cost that you could be really successful and not really have to focus on fundamentals. I think using MT, as we've seen stuff with lower data, say iOS 14, or privacy concerns, and these lacking where you're getting into the lack of tagging and cookies, we're seeing more and more people try to use MTA to justify old thinking or to get to what worked 5 years ago or 4 years ago. Like, well, I used to get all the data, so now MTA gives me all that data so I can continue to go down that path. I think the biggest liability it presents is that it's moving people away from the business fundamentals of investing in the acquisition of profitable customer journeys and future cash flow, and still trying to look retroactively to understand where tomorrow's best investment might be. And that's the issue that I'm seeing with it. But I love the idea that you're bringing up of like, well, tagging and cookies is a fundamentally flawed issue. That is what data you got 5 years ago versus what data you get today. I mean, it's a fraction today of what it used to be. Yeah. And so I think people are leaning more and more and more on these really smart tools to show them that. My concern is that they've come up in a space where the information you had to value was, well, if I'm using Facebook and search and email properly, I don't need to worry about business fundamentals to make money. Now we're facing a spot where Facebook, just like search and just like email and display and programmatic, has effectively reached this place of kind of maturity. To be fair, there hasn't been a massive technological breakthrough in email or programmatic media buying or search that has changed the landscape of proper execution in years. Like, it's not like, oh, well, now it's completely different and you need to like really update it. Like, basically people use email in the same way all the time. You know, people use search in the same way. Programmatic is basically kind of there. There are smarter ways of doing things, but that's, you know, the pebble's not the mountaintop. And my point of that being, I think that with MTAs, the issue that I'm seeing is that people are using it to justify, to give them enough information to execute old thinking that's getting in the way of what's really setting them up for scale. And something that you mentioned a little earlier, and something that I think is really interesting in how we should be thinking about stuff, which I think is really important, is some of the tools that were available, some of the tools that are on the market right now, and I'll call some out, like Hyros and Wicked Reports and Northbeam, are sold as MTA solutions, where you're going to be able to understand the actual credit that any channel or campaign or whatever gives you so that you can lead into that thinking. There are other tools like Triple Whale, which I think does allow you to do that, but is also built more on the idea of understanding the impact of one marketing effort on another. So it's leaning you more into the ability to understand incrementality and less on the hope of just attribution of any sale to one thing. So I guess what I'm getting at here is businesses that you and I have worked with, and you over a very big career with a lot of big businesses, the information that they care about is, how do I find incrementality in my business? Not what worked for me yesterday that I can throw more money at today, or the successful ones. Mm-hmm. And that media mix modeling and that understanding of the customer journey to improve business model and all of that stuff. I think that's what's really separating the folks that are struggling to get out of a $2-3 million business and the businesses that are at 5, 10, 50 million that seem to have plateaued and need a breakthrough. And with that being said, like, I think we've talked about a lot of stuff here, but how do you think we should be looking at the data that we do get from MTAs, or that we do get just in overall decision-making as a strategist when we're deciding our next moves for, because I honestly, I don't think people are able to plan for the next week or next quarter. I can't tell you how many people are looking at it like what ad got spent yesterday and they're throwing money at it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So, you know, I think I see the pivot that we're doing, and I think it's good. And actually, I think you gave us a good area to kind of enter it, because you said, I don't think anything's really changed in how you're handling programmatic buying or search buying or whatever. And yeah, if you look at the platforms, they're the same, and no kind of the interfaces are the same, and no kind of major new way of thinking about that stuff has come out, except the deprecation of cookies, right? Mm-hmm. And iOS 15 update, and like these things have been like major shifts for how these systems optimize and how these systems run. And I think that at least the two major walled garden platforms, kind of Facebook and Google, have done a pretty good job of kind of making the adjustments on the back end, and they're moving to modeling and kind of the Google Analytics moved. They have kind of their new model version for attribution. And I think that's correct. I think it's the only possible way forward. And so, I mean, you said MMMs and media mix models are the way forward. So I'll tell you what our consulting team does. Our consulting team, Sepulveda Partners, does essentially they're big data media mix models that provide MTA-like insights. And the reason why MTA-like insights require kind of insights into the campaigns, insights into the creative, essentially platform contribution. Ours are kind of move across platforms and across channels. So we move into linear and radio, and there is essentially big data MMMs. But we're able to provide those kind of granular insights into contribution because of the ability to integrate kind of granular data and then run it through machine learning, right? So those things and the processes that we're running are they weren't available 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. They've been widely adopted by a lot of companies to do all sorts of modeling, but I don't think that they've fully been adopted within the kind of marketing landscape yet. So, what I'm recommending generally is modeling. More specifically is big data modeling with machine learning as essentially a way to make good use of your historical data, which you have recommended. You can't do the same thing, but you have to bring that in order to make predictions on what will work in the future. So the benefit of the modeling is exactly that. You don't just get kind of a view of what has worked and what has contributed. You're able to then kind of build reasonable predictions on terms of what, where you should reallocate your budget and then what the output will be.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like when we're talking about modeling off of multi-touch, what is really exciting in the way that I think this is solving for incrementality, and why I was super excited about it when you showed me some of this stuff that you guys are doing. Like I've talked to a couple people about it in private, and they're like, that shouldn't. I'm like, yeah, but like it works. Like I don't know what to tell you. Like it's fun. But what I love about it is instead of taking a report card of a snapshot of previous stuff as a definition of how things will work, right? Like maybe if 20% in every channel gets you X, and one channel is a lot better than another, so then you go 50 in that one that's better, and you take 10 in the rest, or something like that. I don't think that math works because then you'd have an additional channel. Anyway, the point is 12 and a half everywhere else. That would work because that's 100%. Yeah. Well, all of a sudden, the contribution of that piece to your overall mix changes dramatically, right? And you can't scale bottom funnel search, for instance, at the same way. Or you might say, well, this works out really well, but in that period, we were doing a promotion, or maybe things are different now because our conversion rates on our landing pages have changed. There's all this stuff. But what I think is really interesting when you're modeling it is it allows you to go in with confidence for decision-making for what you're going to do. And so it allows you to say, what happens if I go 10% more here? Now, for me, the way I've tried to plan that and be safe is I do what I call a total loss investment. What happens if I were to spend 10% more here at zero more transactions? I basically just throw more money over here and set it on fire. Would that still be good for my business? Because if I do that and assume no additional revenue from that channel, I'm now looking at, well, what happens? What's the halo effect on emails and organic search and, and GA, the direct organic or all that stuff, which is usually just hidden traffic from other places, right? Like, what is that impact? And also, like, what happens if I do less retargeting or interest group targeting on Facebook and go broad and I bring more people in? And I will do that on a total loss investment just to map things out. But the idea that you could use that existing data to have a confidence index on the impact of those decisions by channel means that now you can plan for a week or a month in the future. And the more you do it, the better your hit rate is going to get. And so you're way less looking into the past, trying to assume that that's going to be static, and way more understanding what is the halo effect of any decision and planning with that in mind. And I think that's sort of the superpower, I guess, that you guys are bringing to the table that I don't see anybody else talking about. Almost to think of it really simply, like, what if there was a Clippy? Like, you remember Microsoft Word? We all hate the Clippy from Windows 95, 98, or, like, here's a suggestion. Like, maybe you want to do this thing. Or like how Grammarly will clean up your writing for you. We don't have anything like that. And on a very simple level, I was describing what you guys do to somebody else, and it's just like, what if you just had a thing that said, oh, by the way, 10% more over here is going to net you a positive thing. Maybe you want to do that. We have a 95% confidence of a 10% change. Like,
that's our system comes with a recommendation engine. So that's one of the benefits of building a model, is that you can then build a recommendation. So it gets exactly that. And because we also offer the consulting. Okay, so I mean, take a second to talk about exactly what we do.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so we ingest a lot of data. And the data obviously is either API or whatever data streams coming off of your platforms, right? And ideally, it's coming in, with minute increments, hour increments, day increments, whatever the smallest increment is that we can get. The smaller the increments, the more the faster we can model, basically. Then more accurate kind of reads we can get. And we're ignoring sales. So we don't want to know what the platforms think in terms of sales. But we're taking in the impressions, the spend, the clicks, the engagements, whatever. We're also taking in the sales or the finance data from the company, right? And that can come in, if they're digital transactions, or if it's leads or whatever, then we're taking that in hour, minute, whatever. Like, so we're day, whatever the smallest increments we get. If we're bringing in retail data, we might line it up once a week and then kind of pull it back over the days within the. Anyway, so we're bringing in all the data. We're also bringing in other stuff. If we can bring in industry data, market share data, if we're bringing in, we can bring in kind of global economic data, we can bring in political data, like we can bring in all these things that whatever is specific to your industry or whatever kind of might impact flow, competitive spend, if we're able to get it. So we can bring all of that in, and we showcase the media data. But maybe there's PR activity. We can bring in PR activity to a certain degree. And as long as it's countable. And we're able to kind of create essentially, here's the contribution of your digital platforms. Everything else we're not really surfacing up in terms of insights, but it's in there, it's being accounted for. And so we're able to look at kind of like, here's the effect of foot traffic, basically, or organic traffic, or whatever. And then here's the effect of your digital media, or your offline media, or traditional media, or all media, or whatever it is. And then look at it by campaign, or by network, or by channel. So we're doing an evaluation and analysis on the media impact, but we're looking at all other things that might be impacting kind of your business cycles. So there's that. And it's a model. It's just a model. So we're looking at all these things, and we're looking at just one line of sales, basically, right? And so we're saying, what are the correlations to the sales? So we know that when TV goes on and off, there's this switch in sales. And we know that when a certain campaign within Facebook is on and off, there's this adjustment is made. So we're looking at correlations, we're looking at the coefficients, and then we're building.
Like for instance, like if somebody's launching an influencer program, or they have affiliates, or they put a subscription model, or they go heavy into retargeting, or they push everything top of funnel broad, like you're able to understand the downstream impact of that everywhere else.
Right. So then we're we're translating it into the traditional MTA stuff, which is like this channel had this much of a contribution and this campaign had this much of a contribution. We're also creating something like a user journey, except for it's more like a look back timeline that says, hey, at day 8, these things had the highest contribution or correlation to your eventual sale, which was 7 days later. At day 6, these things had a higher contribution to your sale. And it actually shifts. You can see the kind of flow of upper funnel into lower funnel just over the timeline, which is kind of interesting.
And you can also, I would imagine with that, see when you've made strategic changes in your deployment, how that shifts. Like, oh, we went live on YouTube. We went live on YouTube ads. What does that do to that overall mix?
Right.
Exactly. Or maybe shorten the timeline, or it adds cost or something.
Yeah. And then ultimately, then what we have, we translate all that model information into some traditional MTA metrics. And then we introduce some new ones in terms of, percent of spend versus percent of sales driven or leads driven or whatever the KPI is. And then we can also translate it into spend potential, which is like, hey, you can continue to invest here and continue to get positive ROI. You should decrease here and that's turn that into a graph usually. And then there's a recommendation engine, which is literally just change your spend from this to this. It's usually percentages, so change it from 18% to 42% or whatever. And that's it. And so that's what we're able to kind of build out of the thing. Importantly, I think we think of ourselves as building the data sets, which are the model outputs. And then our clients can do what they want. They can build them into their own tableaus or whatever they're using. We can build a dashboard, or we can just port them over and they can build automation on them or do models of models and that sort of thing. All right, sorry, I just wanted to kind of like do the.
No, I think that's tremendously important because people should understand the kind of what we're talking about here. Because what I love is we're decades into people trying to solve MTA. I think you and I have seen between us an untold number of good ideas that may or may not have worked at some various level.
Well, I think the MTA as it is, was understood up until 2 years ago and is still kind of currently understood, was a good solution. It gave more insight. Also wasn't so easy to build these kind of big data models that need machine learning in order to kind of like, update their accuracy and kind of bring in new data and kind of quickly work with new data sets. That's why the MMMs, the media mix models, were done by large consulting firms who came out with like fairly kind of like chunky but useful kind of insights, but they weren't like real-time decision making running through kind of like data streams. They were just like every 6 months you can get like a new this is EV's working for you at this month, at this value or CPA.
Yeah, and I think you're tapping into something there which is interesting in that I think there's a big spot in the market now when we see a lot of brands really moving to it as I can't trust Facebook anymore, or I don't trust TikTok attribution, or what something is taking too much or too little credit.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're trying to build these machines to understand who gets credit for what, and then build off of that to kind of make their decision making. And what I really am excited about with what you guys are doing and how I feel like it's different is in your DNA, it's not here's a report card of what happened. Yes, that's there, but it uses the information along with, really importantly, the two things that I think are super valuable. One is the recommendation engine, which, I mean, I feel like the fact we don't see that anywhere is stunning to me. And I love that you guys are really bringing that in. And I know that you've got a lot more data than a lot of people do, so your recommendation engine can be a lot more valuable because of part number two, where you're looking at market data. And so many people look at their business in isolation, and they have no idea of understanding what other people are doing, right? Like they have no concept of, well, we're getting more people to do X, Y, and Z, right? Whether it's more people are eating healthy or going to the movies or buying, subscription products, or they're canceling their subscription products, or whatever it happens to be. What is the impact of, how much money is being dumped in by the market, or how big is the market cap, or all of these other things that are incredibly important to business information, because sometimes the reason things aren't working the way that you planned it is because for 2 weeks, the world works differently in a way that you couldn't possibly perceive inside of the ad platform. And I think that the fact that you guys bring that in is so incredible and really interesting. And I think that's one thing that I think is really exciting. And so I guess, and maybe we can talk another time about more kind of like how this works and what this looks like, because we're already like 40 minutes in, and I'm sure people would like to see it. But what I'd love to know is sort of like, what is sort of, I'd love to know, one, just sort of your ethos around multi-touch and why you guys are trying to solve the problem in this way. And then also like, what it is that you feel like you need in order to have confidence in this thing working. Like, what are the minimums for you to feel like this stuff works? And then if you have any examples of, like, obviously in chunky big versions of it, like kind of like what this has done for the people that you've worked with. I think that's a really good way of kind of wrapping this up, and why this is important versus just seeing, well, this ad on Facebook got sales. This emails my revenue, like, because those are not actionable pieces of information as far as I'm concerned.
So if you think about, just my professional functions, consultant and investment banker, there's one thing that we're looking for, which is business outcomes, right? And if we can't point to very specific business outcomes, then there's no use of the tool. And the tool was developed, literally to help align, CMOs with CFOs, right? So it's built to be a truly strategic tool for actual business outcomes and kind of meaningful new insights into how to approach the market with paid media. And so I guess you asked for the ethos. It's somewhere in there, right? Like, it's like we really, really need to make sure that this thing is driving measurable results. And so I guess your next question is kind of like, okay, well, it is only going to work for certain kinds of companies. And this is just, so where is it useful? You need the media spend to be, okay, so you don't need the media spend to be a certain size. You need to be generating a certain amount of impressions, basically. And that tends to be like around, if your average, like just eCPM across your total marketing spend, everything from TV to digital to whatever search, is about $10, then maybe about $5 million kind of, and across 3 or 4 platforms will give you enough versatility in your data for us to be able to build models, basically. We should be able to look back a year, ideally. We've built models on, shorter time periods. But basically, if we look at your platforms, you spend about $5 million over a few different platforms. I mean, go back a year's worth of data, and we can get sales data, and we can align everything. We've got ourselves a model, and we can start to work with you. The sales data or the conversion data is also critical. You need to be able to create a data stream on that. And it's pretty easy for e-commerce companies. It's harder for companies with retail. We have approaches for working with retail partners, but you have to be able to provide that data, and it doesn't have to come through kind of every hour. It can come through every day or even every week, if you're kind of really doing large spends, and we're able to kind of publish monthly basically on the updates. But you can still get pretty good insights that way. Additionally, I guess that's it. And those I think those are the main qualifications for being able to run this thing.
Yeah, I think that's really important too, because I think having those minimums is also making sure that the quality of the insights is there and the actionability is there. I mean, you might be running, $1 million a month, which is great, but you're on like one channel and it's really simple and just crushing it. This probably isn't the right fit. I chatted with somebody in Nashville who was running a business, and he's like, yeah, I'm running $2 million a month across like 5 channels, maybe 100 campaigns. I was like, okay, this is a hot mess. Like, that's the kind of person that really needs it, right? Because I don't think people realize how difficult the decision making is when you're really trying to make meaningful change. And I think this is what it really comes down to for me is I've been the media guy at a $100 million company with a lot of moving parts, working really long hours to effectively chase my tail. Because I got really good at some stuff at the expense of other things. And sometimes I worked really, really hard, and it just made my assets depreciate in value faster. And I constantly was like, oh man, instead of getting a win every week, I'm getting a win every day. But I was also killing things every single day just to make that stuff work. And I love the idea that I think that there are folks with decades in the business that kind of have this intuition about how stuff works together. And there are folks that are really good at starting up a business that is working, and that's not their core competency. And the ability to provide sort of that consultant level data set, and you're doing consulting on top of it, but the ability to have that sort of intuition and market expertise within the data set is such a valuable tool. And I think maybe it'd be good to just kind of we can talk about this more later at another time of kind of like maybe what this stuff looks like. But I think it'd be really great to kind of maybe wrap it up in that case, and really just kind of a summation. What I'm hearing a lot is multi-touch attribution is a good idea, and it should help businesses. Often the people that install it, there is some sense of self-preservation in why they're doing things, but it's also really helpful for people to understand big sets of data. Mm-hmm. The downside is it empowers folks to make very minute decisions, very actionably in a very low level, which might get in the way of the overall like success. Like stepping over, just picking up every penny on the ground instead of making money, but instead of making real significant change. And one of the issues is the biggest question is, well, how do we measure incrementality? How do we understand that this thing is doing anything? So instead of being able to solve for that, they're just like, what made me more money? Throw more money at it, which is this very reactive state that I think a lot of folks find themselves in. And what I'm really excited about with what you guys are doing at Sepulveda Partners, reach out to Ben at sepulvedapartners.com, I think is the email address, maybe. We'll figure that out. Yeah.
No, I think it is. Nailed it.
Nice. Hey, look, it's not reinventing the wheel, right? Is that you're using the data that people have, as well as the data that exists with how the market's functioning and how the world and the economy and how, like, for lack of a better word, society at large is spending money, whether it's businesses or consumers, to really give a good idea of what. And I love you have a confidence index in there. Maybe we can get that next time. But the
No,
idea of
I can just say, like, one of the reasons why we have these data requirements is because we think it's useful to have high confidence in our results,
yeah,
in the model outputs. We tend to be at least over 90% in terms of the insights, the correlations, and so
the accuracy is like 90%.
yeah. So that's why we have kind of requirements. Otherwise, we do it on smaller data sets. We're just have less certainty.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really interesting is being able to use all of that stuff for decision making. Because I think, like you, I think you and I agree that, I mean, we're gonna wake up and the cookie will be gone, right? We're gonna wake up and what happened to iOS 14 on Apple devices is gonna happen on Android devices. Like, we're gonna reach a spot where you cannot rely on the crutches that people have been really using for the last 5 or 10 years. And you're going to really have to go back to bare fundamentals of, like, what happens when I put up a billboard? What happens when I run radio? Like, what happens when I put coupons in the newspaper? Like, if you, for what it's worth, as shocking as it may be, billion-dollar companies were built before pixels existed as tracking information. And we're kind of going to get to the point where digital is probably going to look way more like that. And I love that you guys kind of have a solution for how to think about that. That incorporates those other, over-the-top TV and those other solutions into it as well, which is just awesome. So, yeah, I think that's my fair. Just like, hey, look, I'm a big fan of what the hell you guys are doing, and of you as a person too. And I love to get to chat with you. And I think this is a great place to stop. And maybe what we can do is I'll put this out and get some feedback, and we can really understand sort of like what questions people have. And we can also kind of dive into maybe a couple of examples of what maybe some of the things might look like or something like that. So people can really see how this is special and different. And hey, look, I'm super excited about it because it makes the hit rate of folks that have my job and the people that I teach a lot better, because their data is going to be smarter and they're going to be thinking about bigger things. And also, for what it's worth, I think you created a fundamentally different mousetrap that is like way cooler. I mean, for what it's worth, like, it's not like it's like you came up with the electric vehicle and everybody's still trying to get 20 miles per gallon. It's like, but you don't need to. Like, this is just a better way of thinking about stuff. And I love that kind of disruptive thinking. If anybody's ever met me, I am mildly built on that kind of stuff. But I do appreciate it, Ben. I think I've said, let's wrap this up a few times now, and then I kept talking. So with that being said, if there's any way that people can reach out to you, or that you would like them to, let me make sure that we get that out there so that people can use this as an opportunity to talk to you some more, or at least know a little bit more about what it is that you're doing.
Sure. My email address is ben@sepulvedapartners.com, and that's it. We'll put it there. It is.
There we go. Boom. That thing. Oh, wait. Here over to there. Boom. There it is. All right, Ben. Well, I'll let you go, man. I appreciate it. And I'm super excited about this. And I've already got a couple other folks that I think were interested that I'm going to send you away. I think I've already sent you 2 or 3 people. And so hopefully I can send you a couple more, because I want this to be successful. This is super cool. And I think the world needs it. And you're doing good stuff. You're a mensch, Ben. You're a mensch. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So I'm just trying to make marketing a little bit clearer.
Yeah, which makes entrepreneurialism just a little bit easier. And hey, if that makes more money and creates more jobs and puts more happy faces on people, puts more food on the table, allows folks to chase their dreams a little bit more, how is that a bad thing?
All right.
All right, man. I'll talk to you later, my man.